you can't compare concentrations. If you are saying, we've done a study, and at this concentration, 2 parts per million, we have a problem, and then you say, well, we are fluoridating in Potsdam at 0.7, so we've got a big safety margin here. No, you haven't. Because you can't compare these situations using concentration. You've got to find the dose. And that's what you've got to compare. So where these children's IQ was lowered, what was the dose which lowered it? In milligrams per day. Concentration, milligrams per liter. It depends on how many liters you drink as to get how many milligrams you're going to get per day. That's what you need to compare. And I've already stressed to you, you not only got fluoride from your drinking water, you got fluoride from toothpaste, other dental products, from pesticide residues, and so on. So you've got to find the total dose which has caused harm in your study, and then look at the range of doses in the community that you're concerned about to see if you've got a problem. You can't just cavalierly do a little simple arithmetic and say, oh, their concentration is 5 times higher than ours, we're okay. No, that is sloppy, and no toxicologist would do that. Should do. In 2014, Zhang, myself, Chris Neurath, and Dr. William Hersey took our concerns to the EPA. Here we are outside the EPA in Washington. This is Zhang, Huanyan Zhang. This is me. This is Chris Neurath, our senior scientist at the Fluoridation Network. Absolutely brilliant. Lived near here in Canton for quite a long time. He's been our friend for 30 years. And Bill Hersey was a senior scientist at the EPA. And the reason we were going, A, because Zhang had spoken at a conference we had organized, so he was in Washington, and B, the EPA in 2011 did a risk assessment, the Water Division, to determine a new water standard. And they chose as their endpoint severe dental fluorosis. They say this was the most sensitive endpoint to fluoride's toxicity, severe dental fluorosis. And we said at the time, and wrote a full report to the effect, come on, we have studies in China which shows lowered IQ with children that don't have severe dental fluorosis. They may have moderate or mild or very mild dental fluorosis, and yet their IQ is lowered. So severe dental fluorosis can't be the most sensitive endpoint. The sensitive endpoint, it must be lowered IQ, and that's what you should be doing your risk assessment on. So we went to the EPA, and we took with us Zhang, who had all the data to show from his studies that yes, IQ was being lowered without getting to the extreme of severe dental fluorosis. They said they would get back to us, they never did. Bill Hersey phoned them a few times, just completely blew us off. Well, that's just a whiff of the politics of this thing. Now, there's only one study that the proponents of fluoridation have offered as counterbalance what we're saying. And that's a study done by Broadbent in Dunedin, New Zealand. It's funny, in terms of my personal overlap here, I was in New Zealand arguing about these IQ studies and why New Zealand should not fluoridate its water, when on television comes Broadbent to say, we've just got this fantastic study comes out which shows that fluoride does not lower IQ. Well, when we looked at the study, it was not very good. First of all, he had 991 subjects who lived in the fluoridated area, but only 99 in the non-fluoridated. And to make matters worse, he didn't have a measure of fluoride exposure. He should have tried to measure total fluoride exposure, so they only used exposure to fluoridated water. And what we know is that at that time, children living in non-fluoride areas were given supplements, fluoride supplements. And when people did the calculations, they found there was very little difference between the two communities as far as their fluoride exposure. So to say that there's no difference in IQ really was quite meaningless. And our response to the journal we got 2 letters into the journal in which this article was published. So essentially the study compared 2 groups, both with very similar total fluoride exposure. The study had insufficient power to detect an effect. But it's amazing the willingness of the dental community and the fluoridation promoters in government to use this study willfully, ignoring its weaknesses, to negate all the other. By this time there are about 40 studies by this time. Okay. In 2016, I co-authored a paper with Dr. William Hersey and Zhang and others that quantified the risk. Now, to quantify this risk, we had to do 2 things. We had to now estimate the dose. We had the concentration, but we needed the dose. That meant 2 things. We needed Zhang and others to tell us how much water the Chinese children were drinking on average. That allowed us to calculate milligrams per day from water and other sources of fluoride, which in particular was from food. So we were then able to calculate for the same children that you've seen the data, the milligrams per day that they were getting. And so we published this study, and using standard techniques that Dr. Hersey was very familiar with, because he did use them at the EPA, and I won't go into the details, but basically this red arrow tells you from the calculation and the graph that the dose at which the IQ of those children was lowered by 5 IQ points was 1.4 milligrams per day. 1.4 milligrams per day. Many children in the United States are getting more than 1.4 milligrams per day. Some are getting that from swallowing toothpaste, but certainly from swallowing toothpaste and drinking water. So now it's time for me to tell you why a loss of 5 IQ points is so significant at the population level. For some individuals, it's significant at the individual level, but at the population level. And this is one of the flaws of using the public water supply to deliver medication to everyone. Because now you've got to consider exposure to everyone and what potential harm it can do. So let's look at it. Here is the normal distribution of IQ. Every human trait is what we call normally distributed. It's the famous bell-shaped curve. Now, what that means is that the average person will have the average value, whether it's height, weight, IQ, what have you. But it's what's going on at the 2 tails which is interesting. That green area is the fraction of the total. If you put this green area over the total area of the curve, that fraction represents the percentage of children or fraction of children who are very bright. They have an IQ over 130, and the further you go out, the closer they get to genius level. Over here, this is an IQ of 70. These are all the children who have an IQ of less than 70, the fraction of children who are mentally handicapped. Now, let's take that population and shift the IQ downwards by 5 IQ points, shifting it all down by 5 IQ points. Now you notice that the average has gone from 100 to 95. If you were a parent, you would not notice the difference in your children's behavior or skills. If one had 100, one had 95. Nor would a school teacher. You'd have to do a special test to tease that out. So you're not going to notice this. The average person is not going to notice that anything is happening except with those 2 tails. Look what you've done to the very bright children. You've halved, you see how you've halved that area, that fraction? So you've halved the number of very bright children in your society. Your number of geniuses in your society have been halved. And over here, you've increased by about 50% the number that are mentally handicapped. And I don't think I should have to tell you how significant that is if you're a country competing in a global economy. To lose half of your very bright people is disastrous. And to have the social burdens of looking after some children for a lifetime, that too is an economic burden. So if you have any idea whatsoever that a substance out there, say a substance in paint or substance in gasoline, is doing this to your population, you do everything to get it out. You do everything. And that's what we did with lead. Lead in paint, lead in gasoline, because lead did exactly this to our population. But we're not having to negotiate with the lead industry or the gasoline industry. It's our government that is doing this, deliberately adding this substance to the drinking water, oblivious of what I just told you. Now, on the individual level, the last children in society who need their IQ lowered are children from low-income families, who are precisely those children who are being targeted for fluoridation. This is one of their major emotional arguments. We have to fluoridate to help poor kids, because poor kids don't get enough dental care. 80% of dentists in this country will not treat children on Medicaid. That's the real crisis in this country as far as dental care is concerned. In other words, the children we are trying to help are going to be hurt most. And we have to very gently get this across to dentists, because I think most are well-intentioned. They're really doing this because they want to help poor kids and they want to lower tooth decay, and hats off to them for that desire. But hopefully they will now read the literature and to see that these good intentions have gone awry. Now today we have over 300 animal and human studies indicating that fluoride can damage the brain and has the potential to lower IQ in children. 200 have been published since the NRC report in 2006. And here's a list of them. I don't need to go into all of these. I think you can read them if you want to study them afterwards. But if you go to our webpage, I've got Fluoride Action Net, it's fluoridealert.org, but Fluoride Action Net works. Issues, health, brain, you can get a description and a reference to all these studies. In fact, if you just go to our webpage and put in brain, you'll get all these studies. Now, by 2017, there were 57 human studies on fluoride and lowered IQ, and 57 studies on IQ, and 50 showed a lowering of IQ in the high fluoride villages. Again, the consistency continues to be remarkable. Then on September the 19th, 2017, came the bombshell. And it came a day after we had a fan conference in Washington, D.C. As we were getting up in the morning to go home, over the internet came the news of this study. Here it is. It's the Bashash study, and it was published again in Environmental Health Perspectives. The title, Prenatal Fluoride Exposure and Cognitive Outcomes in Children at 4 and 6 to 12 years of age in Mexico. A bit of a mouthful, so let me go through this. Now, the important thing is, this is there was the first of all the IQ studies to show that the critical period of exposure for lowering of IQ is during fetal development. It's the fetus that is impacted most. We'd been thinking of what age children, was it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? No, it's the fetus that's hit most. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the study because it is very impressive. I mean, this to me was like waking up on Christmas Day when you were a kid. You know, we have been working on this for 21 years. We had gathered all this information. We've been criticized every step of the way. We're ridiculed and everything else. And all of a sudden, we have this study which vindicates what we've been saying. So who did this study? Well, first of all, it was a 12-year, multi-million-dollar study. It was part of the ELEMENT project by Howard Hewitt, University of Toronto, which has been going on for 25 years. It was funded by the U.S. National Institutes of Health, pro-fluoridation, the Environmental Protection Agency, pro-fluoridation, National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences happens to be, I think, one of the best scientific agencies dealing with the environment, and the National Institute of Public Health. So the real big players are funding this study, okay, but who did it? The authors' affiliations: University of Toronto, Michigan, Indiana, McGill, again Ann Arbor, Michigan, Harvard, Mount Sinai, and the National Institute of Perinatology in Mexico City. These are top-line institutes in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. What about the experience of the researchers? Between them, they have produced 50 papers using similar techniques on cognitive health of children, their intellectual status, related to other environmental things. They've done the same things with lead, with mercury, so they knew what they were doing. These weren't fly-by-night people, these were solid scientists with a good long track record. Study details. In the study, the authors carefully controlled for many potential confounding factors, such as exposure to lead and mercury, social economic status, smoking, alcohol use, and health problems during pregnancy. All of these things could interfere with IQ. They controlled for everyone they could think of. And this was our announcement on a web page. And this is, I've actually given you the reference here. Again, you can get it afterwards, to a press release from the University of Toronto, which not only explains the paper, but explains the element program. Very useful. So, the study, what did they do? They looked at approximately 300 mother-offspring pairs. Mother-offspring. They measured something in the mothers, and they measured something in the offspring. In the mothers, what they measured was exposure to fluoride during pregnancy. How did they measure it? They measured the fluoride in their urine. Now that is such an important measurement, the fluoride in the urine, because it gives you a measure of total fluoride exposure from all sources. It doesn't matter whether the woman got it from toothpaste, from salt, from water, or whatever. You have a measure of how much fluoride she was exposed to from all sources. It's exactly the measurement that you want when you're comparing between countries, between communities, because it's independent of whether your water is fluoridated or not, or if there's other dominant sources. This gives you a measure of total dose. And what they measured in the they measured the cognitive function, i.e. IQ, of the women's offspring was measured at age 4 and again at age 6 to 12. And what they found, for every 1 milligram liter increase in the mother's urine, the children lost an average of 5 to 6 IQ points. So a change of 1 milligram per liter lowered the IQ by 5 to 6 IQ points. Well, it so happens that the average difference in adults, between the fluoride levels in the urine, between a fluoridated community and a non-fluoridated community, is about 1 milligram per liter. Now here's the scatter plot. This is all the data. There's the 300 data pairs there, looking at the IQ of the children and the levels of fluoride in the urine. Now please notice there's a lot of scatter here. Why the scatter of these data points? Well, because when you're looking at a whole population, the biggest variable is your genetics. It's the genetics. 80% of the variation in a population, as far as IQ is concerned, is 80%. And that explains this 80% of the scatter. Now, why we have to stress that is that some proponents of fluoridation say, oh, if you look at that graph, only 3 or 4% of this drop is explained by fluoride. Only 3 or 4%. That is a very significant fraction of the remaining 20%. And if you do the same scatter diagrams for lead and mercury, you get the same results. In other words, a lot of scatter, but the line, the linear regression, that slope is still significant. And if you plot on here, this is the range of fluoride levels in women in the United States. If you plot these lines up and here, then you see it's a loss of approximately 6 IQ points. So you know, what I'm saying now is if this study is not crap, and I don't believe it is for the reasons I gave you, 12-year study by very experienced researchers, it means that living in a fluoridated community, your children's IQ has the potential to be dropped by 6 IQ points, just by the difference between living in a fluoridated community or a non-fluoridated community. And you see, you know what a drop of 6 IQ points will do to the number of very bright kids and the number of mentally handicapped. This is very serious stuff. The results were highly statistically significant and were undiminished even by controlling for all the potential variables. You still got this relationship, and the relationship went down to 0.2 parts per million. You were still seeing changes in IQ relatable to 0.2 parts per million in the urine. Okay. So what was the response of the American Dental Association to this study? The American Dental Association examined a study in environmental health perspectives based on fluoride intake in Mexico and concludes the findings are not applicable to the United States. Now, this is a classic case of what we've seen 1,000 times. They work backwards. Any study that finds harm must be a bad study. You work backwards. Why is it not relevant to the United States where they found in Mexico when what they were measuring was fluoride in their urine? Don't we have urine in Americans? I mean, this is ridiculous. This is what the author of the study responded in the same article, Dr. Howard Hugh. This is a very rigorous epidemiological study. You just can't deny it. It is directly related to whether fluoride is a risk for the neurodevelopment of children. So to say it has no relevance to the folks in the United States seems disingenuous. This is Howard Hugh. I'm sure he's going to be under an enormous pressure for this study.